The temptation to sin. In the first Sunday of the Lenten season every year, we read in the first Sunday of Lent about Jesus and the temptations in the desert. Now, if we think about it, all of us face temptations in our lives. Temptations are real. From the moment we wake up, for example, thoughts start coming into our head. And if we're not careful, those thoughts will lead us to sin. And those sins will lead us away from God. And if left unchecked, those sins will lead us eventually to death. Now, if you're interested in learning more about temptations and ways to resist temptation, I made a video called Temptation versus Sin, 6 Ways to Avoid It. Please visit the website studymyfaith.com. You can find it there or you can search it on YouTube, studymyfaith.com, Temptation versus Sin. Now, again, every year in the first Sunday of Lent, we read about Jesus and his encounter with the devil in the desert. And in Cycle C, we have Luke's version of these events. You see, before we get more into temptation, I want to define what temptation is to make it clear for us. My favorite definition of temptation is an enticement to sin. And in case you're wondering what enticement means, it means an inducement or an allurement, literally like pulling you towards sin, like drawing you into sin. In other words, that's what a temptation is. Remember, temptation is not a sin. It leads us into sin. So what's the fine line between temptation and sin, if you will? It's pretty clear. The fine line is the consent of the will. You see, we have the intellect, the ability to reason, the ability to recognize this act is wrong. But our will, if our will consents to it and we says, yes, we know it's wrong, we're going to do it anyways, that's sin. So again, if you'd like to learn more about temptations and sins and ways to resist temptation, please visit studymyfaith.com because it's a fairly comprehensive topic to discuss. So now, with that being said in temptation and sin, let's go into the Sunday reading for this first Sunday in Lent. And when we go into this first Sunday, we see Jesus being tempted by the devil in the desert. And for those who've been to the Holy Land and you go to the Mount of Temptation, supposedly within the monastery, there's this rock, right? And Jesus sat there while he was tempted by the devil. And there are 3 temptations, which I'd like to get into right now. The first temptation is stone into bread, right? If you are the Son of God, command that this stone become bread. And what does Jesus say? It is written, one does not live on bread alone. What's the temptation here? Temptation here is to appetite. You see, how many of us can live on bread alone? Literally. We need spiritual as well, in our lives. Temptation here, the first temptation is to pleasure. So the first temptation then is to that of the senses, the sensual, the pleasure, the satisfaction. Now you might be thinking, or perhaps this may cross your mind, you say, well, I don't see anything wrong with eating some bread if you're hungry, especially being in the desert for 40 days, right? Well, the point here is this. Are you in control of your appetite? And this appetite is hunger, right? But there are all sorts of other appetites too. The appetites of pleasure, like lust, sex, gluttony. All of these are subtle, as we notice, and they can be these subtle lies that lead us into temptation, into all sorts of these pleasures. And so that's the first point of the temptation, is to pleasure. The second temptation, take a look at the Gospel of Luke. Then he took him up and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a single instant. The devil said to him, I shall give you all this power and glory, for it has been handed to me, and I may give it to whoever I wish. All this will be yours if you worship me. Now, what does the Lord Jesus say? It is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him alone shall you serve. What's the second temptation here? The second temptation is to power and glory. Jesus can have it all. He can have everything if he worships the devil. Remember that subtle if. Now think about your own life for a moment. How many times in your life have you said, if only I get this, if only I get that, then I will be happy. And you're happy for like one day, right? And then after that, you're not happy again. And you wonder, well, why am I not happy? Let me give you an example. Let's just say, for example, at your work, one day you get a big promotion, big bonus, big raise, new responsibility. Of course you're happy, right? You get more power, more responsibility, even more money. And then come tomorrow and you say, well, you know what? I'm not happy anymore, right? And then eventually we work ourselves to the next level and then we're still not happy after the second day, right? And on and on and on. The point is this, power and glory. If it is everything for you in your life, then you will be worshiping the devil, which is the devil of power and the devil of glory. And you discover eventually you're not fulfilled. And you ask, well, why am I not happy? Even though I have all this power in the world, right? Think about it. Every king, every emperor in the history of the world can have all the power in the world. But they're not necessarily happy. Why not? Because power and honor, power and glory cannot be used for one's own end. It must be used for service of others, right? In service of God. Anyways, more on that in another time. Jesus, though, teaches us to serve God and to serve others. Power is not meant to be self-serving. It is not meant to be abused. That's number 2, and that's the second temptation. Now let's go into the third temptation. Luke tells us, then the devil led him to Jerusalem, made him stand on the parapet of the temple and said to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to guard you, and with their hands they will support you, lest you dash your foot against a stone. Now, how does Jesus respond? He says, it also says, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. This third temptation here is very interesting. You know what's so interesting about this third temptation is the devil is tempting Jesus to test God by jumping down the parapet, which is the pinnacle, the high point of the temple here. This one is a subtle temptation as well. Because on the surface level, it's temptation of testing God to make sure that he will save. But as you see in closer reading, to help us, understand this temptation well, the devil is testing Jesus by saying, if you are God, then prove it. In other words, the temptation is to become God. Now think about it for us, right? The God of me. I can decide whatever I want. I can decide however I want, whatever I want, etc., etc. One of the biggest temptations for us today is to become our own quote unquote God, so to speak, right? We can decide anything, whatever is right, whatever is wrong. We can decide it all on our own. A form of relativism, so to speak. And that's very dangerous because we end up becoming the God of ourselves. So the reality is this, we all face temptation every day, right? From the moment we wake up. But to summarize with these 3 temptations in particular, if I may, the first temptation is to pleasure. We all face temptations to pleasure, right? To the appetites. The second temptation is to power and glory. And then the third temptation is to become like God, right? Remember the serpent in the desert testing Eve to become like God? That's the danger. So be careful with temptation. And again, if you want to learn more about temptation, please find a video I made on temptation or go to studymyfaith.com. Now, live your life by loving God and others. And live your life by serving God and others. This is a way out of this temptation. You see, Jesus, he's tempted by all these things. He knows. He also recognized that he's here to love us and to save us and to redeem us on this cross right here as we see. Think about it. And until next time, have a blessed Sunday.